Right, 24 minutes before 8 here on Morning Live. It's Monday morning. Great to have you with us. So the South African National Editors Forum, or SANEF, has sought an urgent meeting with the leadership of the EFF following concerns over utterances attributed to the party's leader, Julius Malema. This after Malema, addressing party supporters outside the State Capture Commission, accused some journalists of protecting certain politicians. Malema also likened the media to the apartheid STRATCOM disinformation campaign. This, of course, was the apartheid government's STRATCOM campaign. Now, SANEF says since Malema's comments, some of the journalists he mentioned by name have been physically accosted and also abused on social media. SANEF's Executive Director, Kate Skinner, is in studio with us now to give us a little bit of clarity on this matter. Kate, thanks very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Let's see, you have asked for an urgent meeting with the EFF. Have you had a response as yet?
So we're going to make that formal request today.
Okay.
We have had some interaction on Twitter, but that's not the formal request. And it's absolutely important that we meet with the EFF, and I think it's particularly around journalist safety issues. I mean, there are obviously other bigger issues around media freedom issues, but in fact, certain journalists have, as you said in your introduction, literally been accosted physically, and one particular journalist was out at the shops, and EFF supporters, were coming up to her, speaking to her, threatening her, and it was something that we had actually mentioned before, that if you mention and name particular journalists, you actually put them at risk. So if you've got complaints with the media, that's not a problem. I mean, I think a lot of people will be, have complaints, but you've got to go through the proper channels. And one of the most dangerous things we're saying is to name particular people.
Yeah. Even though the EFF leader Julius Malema did come out and say to supporters, please do not physically harm these journalists.
He did,
but was the damage already done by naming these journalists, is what I'm gathering?
So it was contradictory, and I think it's important to point that out, because he said, we've got to deal with certain journalists decisively. And then you're absolutely correct that he did pull back. And then he said, we've got to deal with journalists in a civilized matter or civilized form or something. And then he did say, a lot of these journalists are women journalists, so he particularly talked about that. But I think the problem was the naming of particular people, and then the contradictory way of dealing with things, to say on the one hand deal with decisively. I mean, what does that mean? And then say in a civilized way. So I think the main thing is the naming of particular journalists, I think, which for us was very problematic.
Is it fair for the EFF leader Julius Malema to come out and almost compare what's happening now in the media to what happened in the apartheid years of STRATCOM? No. Is there any form of, I suppose, comparison? Can we say that there are some media houses that do work against certain houses or certain parliamentary parties or certain views or certain parliamentarians? I mean, is this possible?
So I mean, I think to compare it to apartheid is just very problematic, because I don't think you can compare what's happening in the media now to what happened under apartheid. I don't think you can. But I think that what is important is, if the EFF has got particular problems with the media, I mean, there are particular channels to go to. So, for instance, you go to the editors. So, for instance, they've said that they're very unhappy with the Sunday Times. You go to the Sunday Times, you talk to the editor, and then, of course, there various bodies. There's BCCSA, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. There's the Press Council. There's a CASA, regulator. It's not like there are a lot. There aren't channels available, and I think that's what we've got to emphasize: is use those channels. Under apartheid, those channels didn't exist. Now they do. And it's just irresponsible not to use those.
Yeah. I'm actually looking for the tweet that Julius Malema put out yesterday, basically saying that he does not want the Sunday Times at any of their press conferences. I think they wrote an opinion piece yesterday. He came out saying, I don't want you in any of our press conferences, and I do not want to give you any interviews, and that's just the way it is.
Yes, that's exactly what he said.
If we follow this kind of route as a country and as political parties, where we start blocking out certain media houses and saying, refuse, what happens? I mean, obviously there are going to be consequences for having certain media blackouts.
Well, I mean, it isn't good for citizens, because it means that, different citizens read different papers, listen to different news channels. And if you start to say, that particular news channel can't cover us, then it means that those particular viewers, listeners, users don't then get the information. But also what I think is very interesting is the way that particular politicians say that particular news or media house can't cover us because they're critical. I think that's the reason, obviously, why they say, particular media houses can't cover them. So it means that those critical questions, the hard questions, the, holding, people to account, are they not asked? That's very damaging, and we can't get into that kind of situation, particularly before elections, where there are kind of no-go topics. Certain media houses can't cover particular politicians. It's really going to mean that we're going to not have freedom of expression. We're not going to have access to information or freedom of the media, and those are our constitutional principles.
Yeah, and it's not the only. I mean, let's not only focus on the EFF. I know that your concern is with the EFF, and you want to have a meeting with them,
but it goes beyond that.
Well, now we saw another incident coming through with ENCA being banned from covering the launch for Minister Batibile Dlamini of the 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children. That we're still looking into, but that's another plain example of saying, no, you're not allowed in.
Absolutely. So here we were just saying it was such a bad day for media freedom because the 16 days of activism is an absolutely critical campaign. It's about abuse of women and children. It's a huge issue in South Africa. And again, a minister cannot be saying, well, yes, we can allow the SABC to cover the event, but ENCA no. And also no reasons for that. So you're quite right. I mean, it just means that then, and I think possibly what she was saying is that, I think you might be asking us to, critical questions. No, I mean, if you're in a position of power, you have to be available to answer critical questions. That's your role as a public official, a minister. You just have to.
Yeah, I see behind me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi has just been seated on the main set. He's next to Sakina over there. Nice to see you. Thank you very, very much for coming in. We're hoping we'll get an answer to some of the issues that have been raised by Kate, and also to see if that invitation that is going to be sent today is going to be honoured by the EFF to sit down with SANEF and actually have this conversation. Can I ambush you there, Ndlozi? Will you honour an invitation? Oh, you mic'd up? No, you aren't. All right, I'm going to... You came to look, and you do look good. But we are hoping that we'll get that answer, and we'll see if we can get a confirmation whether the EFF are willing to sit down with SANEF. So, Kate, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. And don't go anywhere, because we're going to get a response from the EFF with regard to issues of the media and their views on media and banning certain organizations from interviewing them, talking to them, and also expressing some not good relations with certain journalists out there. Do stay tuned for that.